business is not so much opposed to Marxism or communism as they are to good old free enterprise, competitive business, and consumer sovereignty. That's what really gets them all worried. One can imagine what would happen if people could see what goes into their processed food products, or they could see what frauds so many of the so-called cleaners and cleaning agents are, and the kind of harm that's involved. Or they could see the enormous price fixing that goes on in the petroleum industry and in other industries that sell products to them. And the deliberate obfuscation or complexity of such services as insurance policies, so that the consumer couldn't possibly compare one policy with another to see which is the best buy. The laws are very weak. The penalties are even weaker. Picture the scene. You can destroy a body of water like Lake Erie and nothing happens to any of the polluters. You can destroy a beautiful spot on the west coast called the Santa Barbara offshore area, and there hasn't been any criminal prosecution or fine of the violators. There was recently a $1 million fine imposed on Chevron for the biggest oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. What is that? That's nothing. That's about an hour's gross revenue of the parent company. And it can be just passed on through the cartel in the form of higher consumer prices.
According to our common sense, we think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite, like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are. This precisely, and here the pessimism of the film of They Live is well justified, this precisely is the ultimate illusion. Ideology is not simply imposed on ourselves. Ideology is our spontaneous relationship to our social world, how we perceive its meaning, and so on and so on. We, in a way, enjoy our ideology.
We are the masters of our fate.
We think we have an economic problem. Actually, we don't. What we have is a political problem. I mean, if you look around, we know perfectly well what we have to do to survive and prosper in the modern, global, interdependent world. We have to spend less on governments, we have to have a more liberal markets, we have to have a more equal society. We know what we need to do. What we can't do is persuade our people that's the right way to go, because they don't trust us any longer. You look at Greece as a classic excessive example of this, but you can look at Britain too. I mean, what you find in Britain now is those with the simplistic answers, which you can be pretty certain, I am totally certain, are wrong.
En somme, la formule qui résume l'ensemble de mes thèses. Et ce qu'elle signifie est très simple, c'est que être femme, ce n'est pas une donnée naturelle. C'est le résultat d'une histoire. Il n'y a pas un destin biologique, psychologique qui définisse la femme en tant que telle. C'est une histoire qu'il a faite, d'abord l'histoire de la civilisation, qui aboutit à son statut actuel, et d'autre part, pour chaque femme particulière, c'est l'histoire de sa vie, en particulier c'est l'histoire de son enfance, qui la détermine comme femme, qui crée en elle quelque chose qui n'est pas du tout une donnée, une essence, qui crée en elle ce qu'on a appelé quelquefois l'éternel féminin, la féminité. La féminité. La féminité.
Well, you know, Democrats and Republicans aren't a category. The Republicans and Democrats differ. Like on the rare occasions when I vote, and they're pretty rare, sometimes I vote for Democrats, sometimes for Republicans, sometimes for somebody else. It's not a sharp split. They're two factions of the same party. We have a one-party state with two somewhat different factions with a lot of overlap. The Business Party has a couple of factions. You find some differences between them. I wouldn't say there's no difference on the average. What should you do in that case? Well, like everything, it's your own choice. Do you want to live in a democratic society, or do you want to live in the society we have? Which, remember, is not a democratic society and is not intended to be. If you take a course in political theory here, I'm sure they'll teach you that the United States is not a democracy. It's what's called in the technical literature a polyarchy. That's the term invented by the leading democratic theorist, Yale professor Robert Dahl. But the idea is old. It goes way back to James Madison and the foundation of the Constitution. A polyarchy is a system in which power resides in the hands of those who Madison called the wealth of the nation, the responsible class of men, and the rest of the population is fragmented, distracted, allowed to participate. Every couple of years they're allowed to come and say, yes, thank you, we're going to continue for another 4 years. Like everything else, choice. Do you want to live in a democratic society, or do you want to live in the society we have? Which, remember, is not a democratic society and is not intended. If you take a course in political theory here, I'm sure they'll teach you that the United States is not a democracy. It's what's called in the technical literature a polyarchy.
first of all, if you're going to talk about a revolutionary situation, you have to have people who are physically able to wage revolution, who are physically able to organize and physically able to do all that is done.
Yeah, but the question is more, how do you get there? Do you get there by confrontation, violence?
Oh, is that the question you were asking?
Yeah.
See, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them. On the other hand, because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions. If you are a black person and live in the black community all your life and walk out on the street every day seeing white policemen surrounding you, when I was living in Los Angeles, for instance, long before the situation in LA ever occurred, I was constantly stopped. No, the police didn't know who I was, but I was a black woman. And I had a natural, and they, I suppose, thought that I might be a, quote, militant. And when you live under a situation like that constantly, and then you ask me, you know, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. you ask me, you know, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all.